talk more about this with CNN legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Danny Savalos. We're also joined by former prosecutor Dan Schorr. Thanks, both of you, for being with us. Danny Savalos, first question to you. What is your initial reaction to what you heard from the jurors about atrocity and cruelty?
Well, the concept of atrocity is really very formulaic when you look at the jury instructions. Option one is premeditation, and it appears the jurors concluded that that is a harder threshold to meet. But if you look at the jury instructions for extreme atrocity in Massachusetts, you need not even find that it was an intentional killing, so long as the defendant created a substantial likelihood of death, and then one of the atrocity factors, which Anderson talked about a few of them, indifference. And you think about the defense's gambit that they took, admitting that Aaron Hernandez at least witnessed and was present at the scene. That may have been a jumping off point for the jury to go forward and find that indifference. It's an interesting thing. That gamble was clearly to try and build credibility with this jury, but at the same time, they used that to springboard off of it and say that, oh, he was there, and look how indifferent he was. The atrocity factors are clearly itemized in the jury instructions, and the jurors clearly took them very seriously, and indifference was one of among several options that they could use to conclude that this killing was committed with extreme atrocity.
You know, it's amazing to me that a defense attorney would drop that kind of a bombshell at the end of a trial after making it appear as if his client wasn't necessarily there, wasn't necessarily part of it. I mean, I'm wondering, Dan Schorr, do you think it should have been a completely different defense?
Well, not that it should have been a different defense, but it should have been consistent from the beginning to the end, because at the beginning they were contesting that Aaron Hernandez was at the scene of the crime, and by the end in closing the defense was saying that he was actually at the scene, that he had just witnessed his friend been shot and killed and he didn't know what to do. And the jurors said that that was inconsistent with the videotape where you saw him hanging out with these people who supposedly killed his friend, handing his daughter to one of them to hold.
Right.
And that inconsistency really hurt the defense.
And I want you to listen to something else that the jurors said. One of the most compelling parts of the trial really was when the Patriots owner, Robert Kraft, took the stand. And he says that Hernandez said to him that he wasn't guilty because the timing of Lloyd's murder. He says, well, I couldn't have done it. I was at a club. Listen to what one of the jurors said about that.
When Bob Kraft had testified that Aaron had came and seen him the day after the incident, or that he went to go see Aaron the day after the incident and asked him if he did it. And Aaron said, no, I'm completely innocent. In fact, I hope that the time that Odin was murdered is made public, because at that time, I was at a club. Even after a professional medical examiner conducted an autopsy, he couldn't conclude the exact time that Odin was murdered. So 2 years ago, how would Aaron have that information, especially if he wasn't involved? So for me, that was important.
And Danny Savalos, interesting. If he wasn't involved, how would he have absolutely known that he was just simply not there, that he was at a club? Again, it seems that that was a big nail in the coffin as part of also this kind of cover-up.
It does, and it's always fascinating what jurors seize on. They didn't pay as much attention to the video of the prosecution saying there's a big heavy box and there's a gun in there, you gotta believe us. Instead, they focused on this, and there's an old saying that jurors like to discover things, think they arrived at a conclusion by themselves. And I think when they see Hernandez making just such a colossal blunder, at least in evidence, saying that, oh, at the time I was at a club, I think the jurors feel more comfortable hanging liability on a defendant who says something that appears so galactically stupid.
Right, and those are the things, it appears he took care in terms of what was going to go down, but certainly not enough. All right, Danny Savalos, Dan Schorr, we thank you both for your time. You can catch more of Anderson Cooper's interview tonight on AC 360 at 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll be right back. And let's talk about all of this with former prosecutor Dan Schorr. We are also joined by psychologist Dr. Jeff Gardier. Thanks so much to both of you. Dan, first to you, indifference. This really made a difference for the jury because they could not believe that somebody could kill someone or even be at a murder and act so cold-bloodedly after it all went down.
Right. It's important to note that originally the defense was saying he was not at the scene, but then at the end in closings they said he was at the scene and he just saw his good friend killed by 2 other people. The video shows him hanging out in a very casual manner with them right after. He's handing one of them his infant daughter to hold, and then he's playing with his daughter in a pool. So this is inconsistent with someone who just saw his friend be murdered by the people who were in his house, and that was very powerful for the jury as they convicted him.
And I wanted the Bristol County Sheriff who watched him, who monitored him, who spoke to him, had something very, very interesting to say about that indifference and maybe where it came from. Let's take a listen.
I ran a criminal division when I was a police officer years ago, and he's the best I've ever seen. He's a master manipulator.
How do you mean?
Well, he pays attention to everything that's going on. He knows how to use his charm better than anybody I've ever seen to get what he wants. He also is extremely adept at compartmentalizing. He can compartmentalize something, as he did with his father's death, to a point where he just doesn't accept it or realize it or make it a part of reality, and he just pushes it away. When he was at our facility, he often talked about the fact that he didn't see it as jail, he saw it as his training camp.
So that is so interesting to me. Do you think that his father's death was so traumatic to him that he shut down all emotions, shut down any ability to be vulnerable by feeling things more deeply? And I don't know him, but I'm asking you as a professional, do you think based on the indifference, the master manipulator, that's a factor?
Well, I think it is somewhat of a factor. Certainly, he said that he had a very close relationship with his father, though we don't know the type of man that his father truly was. But when we deal with these sorts of traumas, what we do is we institute these coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms. And for him, it would be pushing down, stuffing down those feelings, and then having a personality style of just not dealing with emotion at all, which could relate to being that cold-blooded killer.
Dan, for him to mouth the words, you know, you're wrong, and then later say to somebody, you got it wrong, his defense miscalculated by initially not putting him there and then actually saying, yeah, okay, he was there. But he didn't do it. He didn't pull the trigger.
Convicted. He's still denying it, but that's his right. He's not going to say, okay, you got me, I did it. So he's still saying he didn't do it. He still has an appeal. He still has another trial that he's facing for 2 other alleged murders. So of course he's going to maintain his innocence. As far as being a master manipulator, yes, he manipulated people, but he was ultimately caught. He was convicted of first-degree murder. He's going to prison most likely for the rest of his life. So he's not the master manipulator that maybe he wanted to be.
But the other part of this is that he has to live with himself.
Right.
And how do you do that? Well, you engage in denial. You engage in isolating your affect and your feelings, because at the end of the day, you still have to see yourself as a human being, and you don't want to view yourself as a monster, even though you have behaved in that way.
Do you think he cracks? Do you think there's that moment of that epiphany, that realization that, oh my God, I have killed another human being? Although he will fight it, so let's say allegedly for the time being, even though he has been proven guilty.
I think after years and years in jail, as he gets older, as we see with antisocial, sociopathic personalities, that as they get more knowledge and more wisdom in old age, they begin to come to the realization as to how they've destroyed their lives and destroyed the lives of others. And I think it's that baby daughter of his who one day will confront him when she visits him in jail that will get him to finally crack open that ice-cold heart that he now has.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the jury. Dan, it's very rare as a journalist, and I've covered a lot of trials, to see jurors coming out as a group, as a team, to talk about this verdict. What do you think is going on? And then I'm going to ask you from the psychological point of view.
Well, they were very impressive in the interview with Anderson Cooper. Sometimes jurors don't seem like they focused on the law enough. They really knew the law. They talked about what was appropriate evidence, what was not. They talked about what they needed to prove for first-degree murder. So they spent a lot of time together, so much time deliberating, so they stuck together.
That a relationship, and Jeff, very quickly, but it also seems, this is like any other murder trial, really, except you're passing guilt on Aaron Hernandez. So psychologically, do they feel they have to validate the decision that they made?
Absolutely, and that it is difficult for them because this is a great tragedy. A person lost their life, and this person, Aaron Hernandez, $40 million contract, threw it all away. So a great American tragedy all the way around.
Right, it really brings things into perspective. Dr. Jeff Gardia, Dan Schorr, thank you so much. We always appreciate your insights. I'll be right back.